Why does institutional adoption matter?
The entire global financial balance sheet is around $520 trillion. But only around 4 trillion of that is in the crypto markets. So that's less than 1%. If we're serious about bringing real capital, real users, and ultimately usage onto blockchain rails, we have to consider all of the users, capital, and operations of institutions.
Institutions have been trying to use blockchain for years. What's different now?
So actually what they've done is try to use private chains, permission networks. So they've ended up creating more decentralized, but ironically more isolated networks.
What is one moment, one conversation, one panel, something that you heard that was different that made you like, oh, wow?
His take was quite different. If you have the same access to raw data, you can democratize the way in which it's packaged, and you kind of bring it back into the DeFi world.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of Tech It or Leave It podcast. I am joined by Peter Bidewell, head of product at Rayls. Absolute pleasure having you all.
It's great to be here.
Really unnatural, but you can go ahead and just
good.
just up here.
Hi, I'm Peter Bidewell, head of product at Rayls, and it's great to be here.
You're the best. All right, first question. Why does institutional adoption matter and isn't crypto industry right?
Well, it's actually a great question. So if you think about where we've come from over the last 10 or so years, and you think actually there's been such enormous growth and adoption around the crypto retail side of things. But if you look at the numbers, it tells quite a different story. So the entire global financial balance sheet is around $520 trillion. But only around 4 trillion of that is in the crypto markets. So that's less than 1%. And actually, if you look at the number of active users in the TradFi world, you're talking around kind of 5 billion people, adults with a bank account. But in crypto, there's about 50 million active users. Again, it's only about 1%. So if we're serious about bringing real capital, real users, and ultimately usage onto blockchain rails, we have to consider all of the users, capital, and operations of institutions and bring them on chain.
Sure, no. Very cool. Second question, institutions have been trying to use blockchain for years. What's different now? Why are we seeing more adoption?
So it's a good one. Imagine over the last 10 years or so, there's been a reluctance to use public chains by institutions, a whole range of different reasons, but ultimately they don't feel comfortable from a compliance perspective. They don't feel comfortable giving all their data away to all their competitors and giving away trade secrets. So actually what they've done is try to use private chains, permission networks. And what has actually happened there, right? So they've ended up creating more decentralized, but ironically more isolated networks. So that's a lose-lose on both fronts. A bank doesn't want to give away their data and have to compromise on their governance with their counterparties, but nor do they want to restrict themselves where the assets they are issuing and their liquidity is retained only to one kind of walled garden. They want the same access to the global markets they already have today in their TradFi world. So it was a kind of doomed to fail project, an endeavor. And the net result is that out of thousands of different projects and POCs that have been attempted in permission networks, only the kind of small tens have actually made it through into production and are now at scale. The big thing is that there needs to be this transition from purely isolated private institutional networks to enabling institutions to issue their assets in a way that they can then move them through onto public chains.
Fantastic. Why do they need, so obviously both will need to be connected, right? But why do they need that connection between the private and the public chains?
So you've finally got this choice as an institution today. You can go back to this kind of quite isolated approach we just talked about, or you can kind of dabble where you get some exposure to the crypto markets. The issue there is you don't really have the infrastructure. So yes, you can use some kind of platform, you can buy and you can sell crypto, but when it comes to real traditional financial asset issuance and basically the operations that a bank would expect to have, that infrastructure doesn't really exist right now. And so at Rails, we've seen this as an issue. If you want to manage your own operations, your tokenized operations at scale, you need a new infrastructure. You need to be something that you have full control over. It's your own kind of tokenized core banking system, the nearest thing I can describe it to. But with this, you can then scale up to, tens of thousands of transactions per second, tens of millions of client accounts, full control and privacy over all your internal operations for treasury management, for internal trading, and basically managing the kind of permissions and policies internally between your different departments. With those same assets that you're issuing into your own infrastructure, you should also be able to then trade with your counterparties in your local jurisdiction, governed by your local regulator. And if you get that right, then you've got this, again, nice kind of fluid secondary market, but based on your own local currencies and local country. But the same assets then should then also be able to be migrated across to a public chain to then distribute across global DeFi. And so then you get all the upsides of DeFi innovation, you get a compliant way to distribute assets to global new sets of users, and ultimately then new sets of revenue. And so for me, this is where the sweet spot comes in. You're not assuming a bank will compromise or pick a side. Rather, you're upgrading their infrastructure, allowing them to connect all their existing systems, giving them what they need to then have full control to tokenize, and then giving them the optionality where they are the center of their own universe. They connect to whichever networks they want to connect to, but they're in full control of how the assets that they issue are able to move between these different networks and who they're trading with.
One of the common themes right now is on-chain privacy, right? My question to you is, how do you think on-chain privacy is going to impact adoption? Do you think it's going to stimulate it? If so, why? And tell me more about your take on that topic.
Yeah, totally. I think we've seen this, 2025 is about institutional adoptions, and the changes of regulation enable this to be a possibility. Into 2026 and beyond, this is where the narrative shifts towards the tooling that is required by institutions to really scale up their operations. And privacy is the current kind of major narrative that is everyone's talking about. So we've been working on privacy for a long time. It's something that we've had a very strong take on. And we're working closely with the likes of the Ethereum Foundation on them on the retail kind of privacy side. We're making sure that privacy works for institutions. So, for example, for us, we built a thing called Rayls Enigma. And this is a privacy preserving protocol that can be used initially by institutions, but also in future can also be between institutions and retail, and maybe even retail to retail. But it's a framework that allows for fully anonymous and confidential transactions where assets that can be traded privately, fully confidentiality. So that means that you have no visibility on what the asset is, how much of it, or any of the other transaction metadata. So with this, then, it means that institutions can transact across public blockchains with certainty that only they can access. But unlike the likes of Monero or Zcash, there has to be a way for a regulator to peek in and see what's going on. It can't be a black box. So with Enigma and other protocols like it, there has to be this selective disclosures to regulators, where the transacting parties can see what's going on, their regulator can see what's going on, but not their competitors or anybody else in the world. And so that kind of really selective, kind of nuanced approach to privacy is something I'm pretty passionate about. And I think that is going to make a huge difference in the market over the next few years.
Awesome. Last question. I know you got to go. Our industry, going conference to conference, a lot of times it kind of feels like an echo chamber, same topics being talked about, similar takes here and there, a lot of similar faces. I want to know, as we're nearing the end of consensus, is the last day today, what is one moment, one conversation, one panel, something that you heard that was different that made you like, oh, wow, it's like I learned something there, or it's going to be relevant for us?
So I won't name who, but there was a great guy that I met talking around data.
Okay.
And verifiable access to off-chain data sources. Now, we were all familiar with oracles, but his take was quite different. It was that actually there's a wealth of different data issuers, and they're ultimately deriving value from the raw data into something they can then package and sell. And so this I found very interesting because their approach is, if you have the same access to raw data, you can democratize the way in which it's packaged, and you can ultimately then license in a new way that you take the power away from the centralized actors, and you kind of bring it back into the DeFi world. I guess for me that's quite interesting because if you get it right, it changes the game where you have real-time data being produced on-chain, real-time data you can derive from off-chain sources, and then you can kind of bring this whole world of data together with verifiability on-chain to drive much more autonomous actions, whether that's the likes of agents, or even just a bank, for example, being able to make decisive actions based on the truth of information they can now automate with smart contracts. So I found that quite interesting.
Fantastic. Awesome. I love asking that question. Peter, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
You got to go. Busy man. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Time.